Hey, I'm a game developer and I launched two commercial games in 90 days, and I also help other developers launch their games as quickly as possible. In fact, did you know that you can go ahead and speedrun the game development process if you make a couple of few personal life adjustments? This is very important because you want to end up making games quickly, mainly because you'll expand your portfolio, expand your experience, increase the amount of revenue incomes that you'll have, see what works, see what doesn't work, and most importantly, not waste time in your own personal life. And a very weird but fictional comparison to this is going to be Sonic the Hedgehog, which I know sounds funny. But the point that I'm trying to get to is Sonic is fast, avoids roadblocks, and always puts his friends, or in the context of the game developer, puts the players first at all time. So let's go ahead and talk about the techniques we can use right now in order to speed up your development as a developer and other technical things. The first section I'm going to talk about is the adjustable behaviors you can use right now. And the first one I'm going to tell you right now is to embrace humility. There are going to be so many times in development where you need to go through a playtest. And the reason why I'm saying you need to be, humble in this case is because you need to playtest as early as possible. That's right. That means when your game is ugly, when there's not that many visuals, when there's a lot of bugs, things that you know need to be addressed, but you need to find out if players are even enjoying the direction of the game in the first place. If you delay playtesting all the way to the end of the development cycle, you're going to end up struggling because you'll find a bunch of bugs that'll not only delay your launch, but you'll also realize that there are probably key design decisions that you made early on that do not align with what the players like. And for you to fix that is going to be not only costly, but very timely, since it's going to take kind of forever to fix all of that. If you can humble yourself to the point where you say, you know what, this is a very hyper early build. I'm super aware it's ugly, but it has to, have to put it out there anyway. That will allow you to get early feedback that is way more valuable and fundamental to the game's direction going forward. So make sure that no matter what you do, embrace humility. The second thing is we're not robots, all right? And I say this because if we could only just work on games all the time, we would be robots. We are humans, which means we have responsibilities, we work, we socialize, we have hobbies. There's a lot of things that we do. And so if I told you, yeah, just make a game and see what happens and, go with the flow, you're going to end up launching your game very later in life. And this is actually a very sad consequence because you do have a personal life at the end of the day. There are other responsibilities that you have to take care of. And so it's very important to take the approach to make games as quickly as possible so that you can see what works, what are the design processes that you use, what are the habits that you grew. And remember, I say this because it's really important to develop urgency in your life. If you treat game dev like a hobby and you want to take your time and you want to have fun with it, by all means, go for it. But if you really want to make sure that one day you can be a strong game developer, that you can have a lot of commercial games out, and again, use it as a viable source of whether it's income or some level of status that you want to end up having, this is something that you have to go ahead and take not only for take very seriously, but also again apply urgency because in a very morbid way, life is limited. We end up, reaching a deadline in the real life. So you have to kind of just make sure that you have that mindset of, yes, I need to make games as much as possible, which leads me to my next point. You need to have a habit, and this is a non-negotiable, where you are making your game bare minimum, at least with a minimum of 2 hours a day. I would recommend 2 to 4 hours, but again, I understand that most of us work, we go to school, we have responsibilities, and it's totally fine. Ideally, the more the better. At the same time, you don't want to be a hermit 24/7, and you probably want to attend other personal life objectives and activities. But you really need to evaluate where your time is going and try to figure out what you can do to optimize. In fact, some basic recommendations is you don't have to hang out with all your friends every single day. Maybe if you have distractions, why don't you find a way to cut them out? If there are responsibilities that can be delegated or simply minimized, that's another approach you can take. And I would also heavily suggest to never commit to working on multiple projects, as that kind of like spread of energy is just not good at all. All right. Now, the other part that I really want to mention is on paper, ideas sound good, right? It's like, yeah, I have this idea, I want to do this, I want to do that, but they do absolutely nothing in comparison to execution. Right now, if you are a game developer working on your game, I want you to pause this video, open your game engine, and go back to coding, because that's more practical, that's more effective, that's a better use of your time. If you again want to continue learning some lessons, or just you're watching this in a car ride or whatever, sure, I'll continue speaking here. But understand that your execution is way more valuable in everything else in comparison to just saying, oh, I think this, oh, I have this idea, oh, I want to do that. Don't say want, don't say think, just do. All right. Now, the other thing that I want to say, and I think this is very important, is you need to find a way to always avoid your weaknesses. If you are a solo dev, this becomes a little bit more apparent because you can't necessarily be skilled in every single aspect of game dev. That's very demanding, and there's so many things to learn. So you have to learn how to pick your battles and pick the ones that you would effectively fight. At the same time, I would also say this is terrible advice because you want to make sure that for a commercially viable product, it doesn't matter if you're skilled or not. You need to find a way to delegate, find people that can help you, get the talent or the skills to actually build what is required. All right. Being said, remember when we're talking about humility as a whole, right? There's no shame in asking for help. It's better to get help to build something good than to be a little bit arrogant and say, hey, I think I can do it on my own and end up delivering something that isn't as commercially viable as you want. However, if we're talking about shamelessness and arrogantness, there is one thing that is important about that particular behavior, which is don't ever be afraid to do what's called the double text, right? Which is basically, hey, what if you were to upload media or content or something explaining an update? The whole point that I'm trying to address here is that as a developer, you will end up reposting one way or another. Again, it could be for marketing purposes. It could be maybe you have a build, then you update a build, then you do an update for the build and make an announcement for that. All I'm trying to address is that you should not be shy when it comes to asking for help or simply just reposting over and over and over again. And so there's an extent to this and there's some limits that we can talk about. But the whole point is you need to make sure that, yes, understand when it's okay to not feel shame for asking for help, but also understand when to be shameless when it comes to posting your own content. All right. The last part that I'm also going to talk about is, and it very much relates to the whole like reposting part, is hey, you're going to get a lot of feedback. Okay. You're going to get good feedback. You're going to get bad feedback. And you're going to get personal criticism as well. And I'm just going to tell you, just like how we see in the Kirby meme here, you just have to ignore it. All right. Words are words. And if you take it personally, then that's something that you have to kind of work on. I'm not trying to say, hey, you need to grow thicker skin, but at the same time, that's probably the best approach you can take. So make sure you know how to filter feedback, make sure you know what's good and positive, and more importantly, what's actually productive when it comes to constructive criticism. But if it's criticism that doesn't necessarily inherently help your game, or if it's like a personal type of thing, don't take it personally, ignore it, keep moving on. All right. So those are the behaviors that we talked about. Here are a couple of techniques you can use right now to speed up your game. And the first one I'm going to tell you is what's called Parkinson's Law. This is simply by putting a deadline. And we say this on the channel 24/7. You must put a deadline to do anything effective because the deadline would end up putting pressure into actually making and delivering and launching your game. If you ever had the argument where you said, hey, like games can't be made fast, I would challenge you to look at game jams. Game jams typically last a weekend, maybe 4 days, maybe a week. And yeah, every now and then there's a rare exception where like game jams last longer than a month. But the whole point is it's such a micro or you just have such a little amount of time to deal with building 20 billion systems that looks presentable and polished and fun. But the key of why this works so well is because most game jam games only hone in on one key feature. And so if you want to scope down your game or make something more quickly, just make one feature and call it a day. At the same time, if you just want to have that external pressure, then make sure that you add a deadline. And if you could do both at the same time, you're going to get really effective results. I recommend you checking out Chris Rosario's itch page since he basically launched so many micro games that were done in weekends. And it's kind of ridiculous how quick it's been done. So check that out when you can. Also, what's very important is if we're going to set a deadline, we also need to set an end point or a termination point. The reason why this is so important is because you need to know how your game ends. If you continue to develop endlessly, what happens is your scope expands and bloats to the point where it feels like it becomes irreversible. When you get to that state, you end up recognizing, oh man, there's so much work to do. I think I'm in development hell because now you don't know how to underscope, you don't know how to shrink your scope, or maybe you have too much content to fix, or maybe there's too many overlapping bugs. And so it's so important for you to sit down and write down what your target is, what your endpoint is, what are you trying to address. For example, if you're making a platformer, let's say it has to have 10 levels, 4 enemy types, 6 bosses. Okay, by giving yourself that parameter, you now know exactly what your target is. And then now all you have to do is start building the things that actually get you to the ending, not the fluff that sounds good or is like fun to do, because that fluff is going to end up, distracting you and not letting you launch. So always plan your endpoint, always understand how to get to your endpoint, and just recognize that, hey, like it might be boring, but that's really important to do. All right. And by the way, you might be asking, well, how do I actually write an endpoint? How do I get to the decision where I know what my game needs? And this is what I call using the via negativa listing method. It's very simple. You need to imagine every single feature that your game would have. And I'm talking about every possible thing. We're talking about settings menu, the size of the monitor, colors, sound effects, which I know sounds aggressive, which it just basically comes down to, maybe you can write a couple of them, maybe you go super in depth with every little key detail. But the whole point we're trying to get to is we want to write a list of every possible single feature that your game may have. Then you're going to ask yourself, do these features support my endpoint target? For example, if I'm making a shooter and I end up having a trampoline somewhere, is the trampoline going to be very useful because, oh, it's a platforming gimmick that I can use for a level? Or does your game that's a shooter have, maybe has nothing to do with jumping or platforming? You're like, well, I don't need a trampoline at the end of the day. Okay, cool. You basically have to make the decision to filter out what is necessary and what is not necessary. And what ends up happening is once you start crossing off items that you truly don't need, your final list becomes super, super small and micro to the point where you realize, these 7 features are the ones that I will actually need for my game. And these are the things that I have to build. By the way, fun fact, if you take that list of 7 and do the exact same process all over again, what can I do to reduce? So I need 7. Why don't I bring it down to 5? What are the 2 features that I really don't need? You can continue to destruct your own idea to the point where you have just the necessary amount of features needed to make it easier to launch. All right. Now, let's say you're in the opposite realm. Instead of building the game, you actually already have a game and you really want to try to find a way to scope it down. That's okay. You need to learn how to cut, scrap, and just get rid of content as much as possible. Maybe you're at a point where you have this very giant bloated project and you're like, hey, I realized I have a jumping button. It never gets used. Let me just remove that as a whole. And that's fine. The whole point is you need to learn how to cut content as quickly as possible, but more importantly, recognize that nothing is truly lost when you do cut content. I say this because, for example, in my game, I ended up removing the jump button, but that's okay because now I know I have this script and I have this basic library of how to make characters jump that I can go ahead and recycle for a future project. To exemplify this even further, my Dodge King Deluxe had a bunch of features that I ended up cutting, such as cutscenes, multi-character select, and game modes that were scrapped. However, these features were quite literally ported into the next game, and now these are available features that are currently in Another Chance at Happiness, which is the game that I'm currently making. So don't feel afraid to cut content because, again, you can always report it for later uses. And then I would also tell you, and this is going to be very critical, when you have your idea of all the features that you need, of all the things that your game is going to have, you really, really, really want to work on the systems and the dependencies first. This is objectively going to be the most boring thing ever because you're not going to see really cool visuals or the cool effects that your game should have. In fact, I would argue that polishing your game later is going to be very, very crucial. Polishing basically includes replacing placeholder art so that you have better looking art. You work on the game juice. You work on a lot of things that makes your game visually more pleasing. And I would argue, yeah, there's a couple of artistic things you do want to do, maybe like character designs or a couple of effects that'll make sense. But the whole point is the most boring part of development is probably going to be systems, dependencies, just making sure that you have this framework of where you can add content later. If you take this approach, you basically have the ability to scale your framework until you can just add content and content and content to the point where you basically end up polishing your game and then you have something that's launchable. I made a video just about this that you can look at the link in the description down below that goes deeper into this, all right? And then lastly, and I do not recommend this approach at all. However, if you are a solo dev and you truly do not have access to delegate or get any type of resources or help, if you end up encountering a feature or a problem that you simply don't have the skills to do, simply find a way to pivot. So for example, let's say you want to make a really cool game and you realize, hey, as a solo dev, I am not good at 3D modeling. I'm terrible at rigging. I don't know how to animate, but maybe I can do something with 2D. The idea would be, hey, you should, find a modeler, find a rigger, find someone that could help you out. But if you can't do that, and if you truly don't have the ability to do anything, then pivot to 2D, for example. All right. Again, I don't necessarily recommend this because I always say for your commercially viable product, you want to make sure that you get all the resources to make it viable. Not, oh, let me see what I have available and see what happens. At the same time, I also recognize this is an appropriate approach that you can take if you're struggling at that point. Finally, we're going to talk about the last section here, which are other tools that you can always use to speed up whatever project you have, regardless of its state. Meaning, if you're just starting the project or if you're ending it, here are things you can do right now. The first one that I'm always going to recommend is a roadmap. A roadmap is basically an instruction checklist that goes step by step by step by step by step by step by step of every single feature that you're going to add in your game, but more importantly, how to actually build the feature. All right. And this is something that requires skills to develop. So if you're going to make your own roadmap for the first time, you can absolutely do that. But there's probably going to be some gaps or insights that you end up missing. You can always discuss with another developer, and if you're looking for help in particular, please check the description down below to see for more information. And there's also a video that I made about this as well. Being said, the roadmap is going to be your number one friend and tool, and basically the best resource you'll have to just really see where your game is, what is missing, and what dependencies you have in order to continue making content. The next part that's really important is if you have the ability to work in a team, you would have the ability to delegate as much work as possible. Maybe you need an artist, maybe you need an audio person, maybe you need a dedicated programmer or a modeler. Again, there's so many ways that you can tackle a project, and the more talent you have, the more, faster and easier your game development process will be. If you are in a supportive environment, you would basically have the ability to succeed much more quickly simply because you'll have, again, support. I specifically say this for playtesting. If you're in the process of playtesting, you want to get as much honest feedback as possible, and people, players, or developers that are very proactive in actually just finding all the bugs and trying to find all the ways that you can improve your game. So if you have that support network, it is going to be extremely valuable. Outside of playtesting, it's also great to bounce ideas and to figure out what you need to do in your development anyway. And another thing you can do right now, which is super easy, well, depends on the context that you're at, but drop social media, drop doom scrolling, and stop consuming content that is very inappropriate that doesn't help you out. One of the biggest time losses that many developers have is when they're simply stuck and glued on their phone. I've personally seen developers that have a screen time that is very, very high, and you can clearly see that, hey, like if you had these amount of hours that you allocate onto your phone, if those hours could have been allocated to the actual development, you probably would have finished your game months ago. And so it's a little bit disheartening to see what happens when you just spend a lot of time being distracted, right? I understand that you might have vices, right? Maybe you are addicted to doom scrolling. Maybe, unfortunately, you have a porn addiction, or maybe you're watching too much content that, again, you shouldn't be watching. Like I said, you can pause this video, stop watching the video, and then open your engine, keep programming, do what you got to do. But the whole point is, in general, you need to find a way to drop your distractions. If you're looking for a way to quit watching pornography in particular, I have a video just for that as well that you can go ahead and check out. And finally, one of the most important tools that you will ever have is adding an external deadline. This is continuously adding more onto the whole Parkinson's law conversation where, yeah, you want to add a deadline. You want to make sure that no matter what happens, you respect the deadline. But it becomes harder to dodge accountability when a real deadline is pressing you, all right? It's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to make a game in 3 months. Let's see what happens. And yeah, you'll make a lot of progress by following that methodology. But if you don't have the pressure of actually launching on day 90, you're just going to make a lot of progress, but you're not going to finish. Now, if I told you, hey, the next fest is coming up and you actually need to launch your game to take full advantage of the next fest, suddenly the pressure becomes way more real. And now you have to make critical decisions to actually launch, for example. So whenever possible, whether it's a game jam, a showcase, or an actual launch that showcases new games that came out, please make sure that you always sign up for external deadlines in addition to your internal deadlines. Being said, thank you for watching this video. If you wanted to learn more, this channel basically talks about speedrunning the production process of game dev. My New Year's resolution is to get 67,000 subscribers. So if you like and subscribe, I would very much appreciate it. We have a lot of extra resources in the description down below, other videos that you can watch. And I will always comment down below if you had a question, comment, or concern. And I hope this really helped you out. Good luck on speedrunning your game.